If you want to get into live streaming or filming content by yourself, this is the most powerful PTZR camera on the market. It has a built-in 5x optical zoom. It can do up to 12x digital zoom. You can mount it permanently in your shooting space or take it out on location with its built-in battery. And what's most exciting is it will track and follow your subject with AI without the need of any additional camera operator. Could this be the ultimate one-man crew camera? Let's find out. Almost hit the camera. If you're a photographer, especially if you're shooting 20 to 30 weddings a year like I used to do, you know how chaotic it can be managing galleries and client communications. And that's where a platform with a modern, easy to navigate client gallery truly makes a difference. Imagine delivering photo galleries that look clean and professional while clients can easily favorite their favorite images, download files in various resolutions, order high quality prints, and even design their full wedding album all in one place. All of this and more is possible with PixieSet. Looking back on my own career, I made a huge mistake by collecting both of my personal emails and my photography business emails all in one inbox, which made it really tough to keep up with everything. PixieSet Studio Manager offers a standalone space for all your client emails, keeping everything organized and all in one place. They also have integrated website design tools so you can update your portfolio easily, giving you a professional web presence without all of the hassle. If you find managing all your photography bookings and contracts and invoice deadlines stressful, PixieSet Studio Manager simplifies everything, so you can focus more on your photography and less on the mundane tasks that make running a photography business feel, well, like a business. Honestly, if I would have had something like PixieSet back when I was shooting all those weddings, it definitely would have made my life a lot easier. If you're looking to streamline your business workflow, regardless of what type of photography you shoot, check out PixieSet in the link in the description below. So this is the OBSBOT Tail 2 camera, and like I said, it's the first PTZR camera to hit the market. Basically pan, tilt, zoom, and roll. And it's the big brother of the very popular Tail Air camera that's been on the market for a few years now. So let's quickly talk about some of the features of this camera before I take this out on the field and see how it actually performs. So the lens inside this thing is self-stabilizing, so as I turn it around, it's going to keep its horizon. But you can also flip it vertically or horizontally depending on what type of content you want to create, which is really cool if you're shooting traditional content, but then you also want to flip it vertically to do social media content. You can do that with the click of a button. It also has built-in battery power so that you can use this out on location with no additional power. But you can also run power over Ethernet. So if you want to run a longer cable outside and have a way to connect that to an Ethernet jack that supplies power, you can do that as well. The Tail 2 connects wirelessly to your home network, so you can use this in any room over your existing Wi-Fi, or you can turn on its own Wi-Fi and connect it wirelessly to your phone so that you can stream out on location with a much more professional camera than what's built into your phone itself. As for all the connections on the back of it, let's check them out. We have a mic in and an audio in for audio, which is really handy. It has a full-size HDMI 2.0 jack so that you can export video directly out of the camera. It also has an in and out RS-232 jack, so if you have a system that uses that, it comes with these adapters so that you can easily connect those connections to this camera as well. And if you're in broadcasting, what's really cool is you can use this camera to send out 1080 footage using the 3G SDI connection. Like I just mentioned, it does have a 1 gigabit Ethernet connection that accepts power over Ethernet that can be used with NDI, but you will need to buy a separate license for that. 2 separate USB-C jacks, one for power and charging, and the other for video output and data transfer. And here on the side, we also have a micro SD card slot for local internal recording. Here on the front and on the top, the Tail 2 has multiple tally lights that tell you what state the camera is in at all times. When recording, the Tail 2 can do 4K at 60 frames per second down to 24 frames per second, and 1080 up to 120 frames when using the internal SD card. The SDI option is limited to 1080 at 60 frames per second, and if you use NDI, you can do up to 4K at 60 frames per second. The bitrate can go all the way up to 160 megabits per second in H.264 or H.265 formats. Now let's talk about the lens and the sensor, because what makes the Tail 2 so appealing is the hardware is quite robust for a camera like this. For the lens, it goes from 4.6 millimeters to 23 2.3 millimeters, which if you apply the 3.9 crop factor, it acts as a 22 to 110 millimeter full frame lens equivalent. It has a 5x optical zoom range, or 12x if you zoom in digitally, which is pretty remarkable. And the aperture is f1.8 at the wide angle, and then all the way at the telephoto side, you're down to f3.0. Now with photography, digital zoom is basically kind of pointless because you can always easily crop the final image in post. But with video, since your final resolution is going to be baked into the file, digitally zooming into a sensor can be a huge advantage because a 1080 or 4K video file is rarely using the full resolution of the entire sensor to begin with. So while I'm mentioning digital sensors, the sensor in this camera is a 50 megapixel CMOS sensor. So if your final video resolution is, I don't know, 4K, which is about 8 megapixels, in theory, you can get about 2x additional digital zoom before you start to lose image quality. Now, most manufacturers, they multiply the optical zoom with the digital zoom to give you the full actual zoom, and that's where we're gonna get this 10 to 12 advertised zoom range on this camera. Now, the size of this 50 megapixel sensor is 1/1.5 inches, which is pretty large compared to a, webcam sensor or something like that. It's still larger than the iPhone sensor, but it's about 4 times smaller than a micro four thirds sensor, which means it's going to be a lot harder to get a shallow depth of field effect, and it might really struggle in low light compared to these larger cameras that, most photographers are used to using. So let's talk a little bit about depth of field and how this camera might compare to the more professional cameras maybe you're used to. This smaller sensor with this specific lens is going to give you a look that looks about like an f7 to f11 depth of field compared to a full frame camera, which isn't great, but if you're filming speakers at conferences or live sports or something like that, it's probably not gonna need the shallow depth of field that you might find on a larger sensor camera. So I was curious to see just how this camera would look compared to the cameras that we use. I'm filming right now on a micro four thirds camera, and I also have a bunch of full frame cameras here in the studio. So here's a comparison of the depth of field between my Sony a7 IV full frame camera using a 2.8 lens, and I've set the Tail 2 to the exact same framing next to it. And as you can see, as we switch between these two cameras, the Sony mirrorless blurs the background much more effectively. And it's also shooting at ISO 500 in this shot, whereas the Tail 2, we've maxed out the ISO at 3200, and because I'm shooting at 60 frames per second, the slowest shutter that I can effectively use is 1/60th of a second. So there's no doubt everything about the Sony is better in terms of image quality, especially if we zoom in at 200. The text is so much clearer and the depth of field is significantly more shallow. But like I said, I don't think it's really fair to necessarily compare this Tail 2 camera to a full frame camera based on their intended applications, but it is interesting to see these images side by side. Now, the Tail 2 has a ton of different connections on the back, which makes it really useful for studio or live venue applications, and you can control everything through their app called OBSBOT Center. However, since this camera has a micro USB slot and a battery, what I'm most excited about this is to take it out on location and disconnect it from the studio altogether. I also have the OBSBOT wireless remote here, and I find that this is really a critical accessory that you really probably should get if you buy this camera, because it is so much easier to move things around. The phone app works great, but sometimes you don't want to necessarily be tethered to the phone, or you need to be doing other things on your phone and you still want a way to control the camera. This is a perfect way to do it. Now, obviously, I would use a camera like this primarily for YouTube content, but we also have done a lot of live streaming during the pandemic. We did the crazy coronavirus journals.
It's called mask droop syndrome, where people leave their noses uncovered.
You got to do the whole
mask droop syndrome.
Yeah.
Is that what we're suffering from now?
It's super deadly. This is great for streaming, but what really made me want to get this camera is I am always looking for a way to film myself out on location without needing an assistant or having, I don't know, to constantly fiddle with the framing of my mirrorless cameras. The idea of having a camera like this that could automatically track me and keep me in frame while making YouTube content out on location would be an absolute game changer, and that's primarily why I picked this up. I'm hoping to use it in that way. Most of the other YouTube videos that I've been watching, they're primarily using this for live events like at church or during their live streams in their studios. but I really want this to be something that I can throw in my backpack and take it out into the field. So if you are interested in how this camera can connect to different switchers and be used in live streaming or used in a more permanently installed situation, I'll put a link to some of my favorite videos that I've watched showing you how to do that in the description below. So with all that being said, my perspective in this video might be a little different, and everything that you see from here on out might not be entirely how this camera was meant to be used. In order to use this camera on location, you need to use the OBSBOT Start app. They also have a live app, which allows you to live stream through your smartphone and use both your phone's cameras as well as the Tail 2, which is really interesting and could open up a lot of options when live streaming on location. But for me, I'm just gonna be using the Start app. Now, as you can see here in the app, there is a lot of tracking that we can do. If I draw a box around something, I can enable object tracking. So if that object was moving, or if the camera was moving, it would track that perfectly. But if I double tap on a person, I can activate human tracking, and that is going to allow the camera to follow me around no matter how I move. Now you can also use this gesture to stop tracking. So if you want to frame up a specific shot and you don't want the camera to move, you could turn on tracking like this, move the camera, I don't know, maybe this way. Let me get something to work here. And then I could just stop it like that, and now my camera is perfectly lined up, it's not gonna move. So that's an incredibly useful way to turn on the human tracking just with a hand gesture. Now, once you have human tracking on, you can change it between a single person, which would just follow me around. It's gonna recognize, the color of my shirt. Or we could go down to group mode, which would allow multiple people to be tracked. And then if the main person leaves the frame, it's going to continue to track the other people that were in the frame when you activated it. Now here's what's really cool. If I click this button right next to the Me button, it allows me to choose the tightness of the framing. Now I'm too close to the camera to really show this off, so let me get up and show you just how this works. So if I could get far enough away from the camera and I wanted a establishing shot that shows full body, I could zoom all the way out to 24. And then as I zoom it in more, it's gonna just continue to give me a new composition. This is kind of a 3/4 shot. And as I move around, it is going to perfectly frame me up so that I am 3/4. Now, obviously, if I get too close to the camera, at some point it can't get wide enough to change that field of view. But then we could go all the way to 3, and this is going to be the tightest headshot. I almost think that they need something a little bit tighter than this, but this is as tight as you can get. And if I walk around here, it's gonna continue to just follow me around and not lose tracking at all, which is pretty incredible. I mean, look at that. And I have this zoom set to really fast, so I could slow that down so that it zooms in and out a little bit more naturally. But that is the human tracking. And then of course I could just stop it. And then now if I feel like this is a good spot, or I wanna put a graphic over here, I could set the camera, and then when I'm ready to move, I could simply reactivate it and maybe even go wider so that it's gonna just naturally shoot a wider shot now. And the goal here is that I don't need a camera operator at all to do this. Just to the right of that, you can choose how quickly the camera is gonna follow you. I have it in lazy mode right now, which gives kind of a slow and steady movement that's a little delayed. Or you can go into crazy mode, which gives it this very fast-paced action cinematic kind of follow focus. I feel like I like slow the best. Next to that, we have face framing. So right here, I have a pretty tight composition. Everything's framed up pretty evenly, but if I want a little bit more space above my head, I could drag this line down a little bit lower, and it's going to frame me up this way, so that I always have space above my head. Or I could do something like this where it does an offset where it puts me to the side of the frame. So if I want to show a graphic or something, I'm not gonna be totally in the center of the frame. Another thing that's really cool that you can do with this camera that's extremely useful is you can set presets that are predetermined both in their location and in the zoom range. So I'm gonna demonstrate this with the remote because I find it a little bit easier, but I can just hold down P1 here, and it's going to save a position. And then if I come over here and I zoom in really tight, I could then hold down P2. It's gonna save position 2 for me. And then if I come all the way maybe over here, on the app, I'm gonna now hit plus P to do position 3. So I have 3 separate positions now that I have programmed into the remote or into the app. It makes it incredibly easy to jump around to 3 different positions or maybe 3 different people. I feel like I'm gonna use this maybe even more than the tracking, but of course, if I wanna then go back to tracking, I can just hit the button here and boom, the camera's gonna follow me again, and then I can go back to those different predetermined positions. Really cool. So obviously the tracking did really well here in the studio, but I wanted to see how well it would do in a much more realistic environment. So I wound up taking the Tail 2 to my gym and I set it up inside a racquetball court and started hitting some tennis balls. So here you can see it tracking me with a wide angle frame, and over the course of 10 minutes, it did not fail once. So then I zoomed the framing in a little bit more and it still did great. It followed me around even with this tighter crop. Obviously, the tighter you zoom in, the faster the camera has to move, and the accuracy is probably gonna struggle a little bit more, but it did really, really well. There were a few times where the camera did do some really weird stuff, and it took a bit of time to get the camera to lock back on me. Of course, I didn't really notice this while I was warming up, but if this had happened during a more important shoot, well, that definitely could have been a problem. Next, I wanted to take the camera outside and test it against the most difficult subject I could think of, my crazy active 3-year-old son, Hudson. As you can see in this footage, the camera did an exceptional job tracking him as he chased me around in this big open field. There were a few times where it would lose tracking if he was partially blocked by the playground equipment, and from there it was about a 50-50 chance if the camera would begin accurately tracking him again or completely spaz out. For the type of videos that I create for this channel, I can't imagine ever needing this sort of extreme tracking, but I did want to be honest with you about some of the failures that I did experience. It's also important to note that the base of the Tail 2 does not allow the camera to spin around a full 360 degrees continuously, and so in some situations, my son would run past the maximum rotation limit. For the most part, it was really good at locking onto him when he ran back into the scene, but for this shot, it did randomly lose track and it never found him again. And finally, I did experience some really weird results from time to time. When I was testing the Sony against the Tail 2 for the shallow depth of field example that you just saw, at one point the Tail 2 just started zooming in and out, even though the tracking was entirely turned off. I have no idea why it did this. The only thing I can think is that maybe it thought it saw the gesture for zooming in, which I don't think I did. But this just goes to show that you might actually want to turn the gestures off, especially if you're someone like me who uses his hands a lot to talk. Inevitably, I found myself constantly turning on and off the framing or zooming in. It's the only thing I can find that might explain what happened in this shot. Another mode that's pretty useful with this camera is the night mode, and that's just going to make the entire scene much brighter. This does an incredible job when I compare it to like a webcam or my security cameras. It makes the video footage actually usable, but by no means is it going to be good as a 35mm full frame camera. So I was curious to see how well this night mode compared to my Sony camera as well as the camera built into the iPhone. You can see that test here. On the far left, I have the Sony a7 IV, we have the Tail 2 in the middle, and the iPhone 15 Pro with its normal lens here on the right. A lot of people like to rag on the iPhone and say that these cameras really can't be used for professional use, but considering it has the smallest sensor of the bunch, I think it still performs incredibly well, and it's even sharper than the Tail 2 in this example when it's set to night mode. Another thing that I do like about the Tail 2 is that it has a microphone input, and as I've been testing this camera over the last week or so, I've just simply connected my Rode Mic Go receiver directly into the back of the Tail 2, and it's recorded great audio directly into the file through the camera itself. Now, I have seen some reviews that have suggested that the audio into the camera has been out of sync when they get it into Premiere or they start editing it. I have not had that experience at all, so I don't know if they've simply upgraded the firmware, and here at the time of filming this video, that little bug has been fixed. But all of the audio that I have recorded into the Tail 2 has sounded exactly the same as any other camera that I've used. That being said, I do wish that this had a microphone built into the unit itself. Not because I would ever use a built-in microphone for professional audio, but rather if I'm using this as a second or third camera, it would be nice just to do an audible sync and have this camera pick up that sound so that I could sync it in post. But because this doesn't record any audio unless you plug a microphone into it, many times you're gonna have to do a very visual sync so that you can go back and find that exact point to sync up the camera. But if it had just a cheap microphone built in, it would make it a little bit easier to sync up something if you do a audible sync instead of having to do a visual cue. And while I'm thinking about it, the fan in this camera is incredibly quiet, so you definitely don't have to worry about other microphones picking up the fan as it spools up and down to keep the unit cool. Now let's quickly talk about battery life. The battery life on the Tail 2 has been great for all the little mini sessions that I've been testing. The advertised runtime is 342 minutes or about 5 hours, but I've personally found it to be a little bit less than that. Maybe it's because I'm connecting it to my phone and it's using more power. I'm sure 5 hours is determined by some very, conservative settings that they've done to get it to run that long. I do wish that OBSBOT would have included a charger with this camera. They include all of the different cables. We do have a bunch of different power banks in this office, and no matter which one I seem to choose, they just never are charging as fast as it probably should. Here on the screen, it's telling me to make sure that I have one that's at least 25 watts. I'm pretty sure I do have one of those. I do wish that they had included the correct power bank with this camera just so that I know if I'm out in the field, I can plug it into this and it's always going to be charged at the fastest rate possible. I do wish that this camera came with some sort of case, because even when you semi-lock it down in this position here, the lens is protected, but every time I throw this in my camera bag, it still just seems a little off. It seems like it's not quite as protected as it should be. Maybe it just needs a switch up here that locks the camera in place, because you could easily, take this out of this position, but it does seem like a case would be kind of nice for it. From what I can tell, it seems like OBSBOT at some point wanted to release a wireless remote monitor for this camera, and that would mount directly on the side of this remote. There are these kind of unknown connectors here that it just seems like a little screen would make this incredibly useful. I wish they did release a monitor like that, because that is the other little thing that makes this a little complicated, is that if you're out on location, you have to rely on your phone, or you have to plug some sort of, field monitor into the HDMI cable, which just adds more parts and makes this a little bit less mobile. As I said earlier in this video, I don't always want my phone to have to be tethered to this camera, and sometimes I need to use my phone to take a phone call or, reference something on the internet. It's kind of a pain to have to leave the app and then reconnect. It would just be way better if there was a true monitor that you could just pair with this, and it would just be an all-in-one system. So here we are. In conclusion, how do I feel about this camera overall? For the specific application and for how I want to use this camera, I'm gonna give it 4 out of 5 stars. The hardware and the image quality out of this camera is no doubt impressive, and I think this has a lot of potential in a studio setting, or if I was filming a lecture or a presenter on stage, something like that. It's incredibly powerful if you want a semi-automatic way to track your subject and have a second or third camera angle to switch between. That being said, I do think the overall software still needs some refining before I'd ever consider using this completely unmanned or as a one-man crew, which was the whole reason that I got this camera, and it made me excited in the first place. The image quality on this is never going to be as cinematic as my larger, more professional cameras, but at the same time, this is the most advanced camera of this size that I've ever played with. And finally, the price on this thing might be a little steep for somebody looking to get into streaming or filming a one-man operation out on location. This camera is $1,200 and the remote is $79. And so this setup is kind of comparable to a prosumer mirrorless camera and lens, especially if you pair it with a mirrorless camera that doesn't have a super fast aperture lens. You could definitely get something in this $1,300 range, and that camera might be a little bit more versatile, especially if you want to use it for a traditional stills camera and not just for video. So there's no doubt that a mirrorless camera is always going to produce better image quality in both bright and low light, and the background blur is always going to be much better. But without having a way to actually track your subject, nothing can really compete with what the Tail 2 can do right out of the box. Is it perfect? Nah, probably not, but it is really exciting to see what the future of PTZ cameras might look like in the not so distant future. If you guys enjoy videos like this, make sure you subscribe to our channel below. Also, head over to fstoppers.com for free daily content. Most people watching this video are probably videographers, but if you're a photographer and you want to check out our photo contest, head over to fstoppers.com/contest where we do a critique the community every single month. Lee and I pick out our favorite 10 images, and the top 3 entries get some really cool photographic prizes. And if you want to learn how to become a better photographer or videographer, head over to fstoppers.com/store. We have videos ranging from how to get started with photography and videography all the way to very specialized niches of photography like shooting headshots, macro photography, architectural and real estate photography, swimwear, fashion photography, product photography. We literally have something for everybody, so definitely check that out, fstoppers.com/store. And you can use the discount code YouTube and save 15% on anything that you add to your cart in the Fstoppers store. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you really, really soon.